Sometimes, when making a video game, a company may realize that no one is going to fucking buy it. So, to get people to buy it, they resort to this little thing called false advertising, also known as lying. Yes, nothing beats making empty promises to sell your video game. Sega has become notorious for doing this with Sonic games. Since the 90s, there have been a few sprinkles of false advertising in Sonic games, like how Sonic 3 wasn't the biggest Sonic game yet, and you had to wait for the second part to drop later in the year, or how Sonic CD's time traveling mechanic wasn't even that important to the main gameplay. And even today, there are small bits of false advertising in Sonic games, like how Sonic Superstars was advertised to have 12 brand new zones when it only had 11, and many of the zones only had one act, or how the quote-unquote remaster of Sonic Generations isn't really a remaster. However, the biggest instance of false advertising with Sonic in the 90s was Sonic 3D Blast. The damn title of the game is a lie. They just called this game Sonic 3D Blast because the actual 3D Sonic game that was planned, Sonic Extreme, was cancelled. Initially, Sonic 3D Blast was just called Sonic Blast, which some may argue is still false advertising because this game is anything but. Now, looking at it from the surface, I guess this game can technically be considered 3D, but it's played from an isometric perspective, so in reality, it's just an illusion of 3D. And I'm not cutting Sega any slack either, because they knew what they were doing. They realized that Sonic Extreme was going downhill, and they knew they needed to put something out there to compete with Mario 64 and Crash Bandicoot, the actual 3D platformers that recently hit the market. So f it, Sonic 3D Blast, when it's not a 3D platformer. Okay, so yeah, the title is misleading and the game sucks ass. What about it? Well, what if the entire game was misleading? Sonic 06, oh no! Yeah, so it turns out the next-gen redefining game for the Sonic series is just a shitty version of Sonic Adventure pretty much. At least for Sonic's campaign, it's just Sonic Adventure gameplay pretty much, but they ruined it. And that's not even mentioning the terrible state the game was released in, but you all probably already know of all the bugs and glitches that littered the game, and ultimately ruined Sonic's reputation for a little while there. Even the promotional material for the game made it look better than what it was. Like, why do the trailers show more polish than the final game? That doesn't make much sense in the grand scheme of things. So yeah, Sega misled the hell out of its consumers so they can get the game out for the holiday season. And as you might know, this wasn't the last time they pulled something like this. But after Sonic 06 was released, Sega experimented more with different playstyles with Sonic. But that whole thing backfired because the next 3 3D Sonic games were all received poorly. So Sega eventually realized that the best course of action would be to go back to the series' roots and release something that everybody already enjoyed about Sonic. And that's how we got Sonic Mania, just kidding, Sonic 4. The fact that they called this dumpster fire of a game Sonic the Hedgehog 4 should be a crime. Like 3D Blast, Sonic 4 was originally supposed to be something completely different before they realized they wanted to sell the game. Originally, Sonic 4 was just supposed to be a fun little mobile game called Sonic the Portable, but someone had the ballsy idea to market the game as Sonic's grand return to the classic formula. You know, the games that everybody loved in the 90s. Thus, they called the game Sonic 4, released it on all platforms, and people hated it. This looked and played nothing like the classic games that everyone was fond of. The art style looked like shit, the game was not momentum or speed based in the slightest, the level design was A's, the music was garbage, all of the zones were unoriginal, and nothing about this game was done right. It was such a huge disappointment because people expected this game to be Sonic's grand return to 2D platforming. Now, would people have been as disappointed if the game was just marketed as a fun 2D platformer that had nothing to do with previous games? I mean, maybe a little bit because the game would still be trash, but it would just be looked at as another bad Sonic game, and not necessarily an overhyped mess of a game. Speaking of overhyped messes, let's talk about Sonic Boom. This game was in a very similar situation to 06, as the game's trailers made it look better than what it ended up being. However, unlike 06, I feel that this was pretty unintentional. The development of Rise of Lyric is very sad when you take a deep dive into it, because it's very clear that Big Red Button had a vision for this game that Sega just simply didn't like. So they scrapped a lot of things. And then Sega came in months away from release and said, oh yeah, you gotta cram this thing on a console that runs like a goddamn air fryer. Because of all of that, Rise of Lyric ended up being a different game than what we saw initially. So if you ask me, this is false advertising on Sega's part, because they knew that the game was going to be different from the initial reveal. And who would have guessed, Rise of Lyric ended up being one of the most poorly received Sonic games of all time. And it's all Sega's fault. Next up, let's talk about Sonic Forces, and goddamn, this game's marketing was so misleading. Say what you will about the game itself, but I think this was one of the most poorly marketed Sonic games of all time. The first trailer we got for the game right off the bat says the game is from the people who brought you Sonic Colors and Sonic Generations. That's just not true. Sure, there were many people that worked on those games that came back for Forces, but the people who worked on the main content of the game, i.e. the levels, only one of them had previous experience with the Sonic series, and that was with fucking Lost World, which is a completely different game. And the other 2 level designers on the project had no experience with previous Sonic games whatsoever. So it's safe to say that this team was maybe just a tad bit inexperienced with designing Sonic levels, and it shows. But that's not all for Forces. As more trailers for the game came out, we got introduced to some of the returning villains from previous games in the Sonic series. Chaos, Shadow, Metal Sonic, and Zavok were all here. However, even though it was implied that there would be boss fights against these guys, Chaos and Shadow did not get fights in the game and were just delegated to stupid cutscenes that ended in 5 seconds. They served no purpose other than the fact that they looked cool in the promotional material. And it doesn't stop there either. The first gameplay we ever got of Sonic Forces was Sunset Heights. It was heavily implied that this was going to be the first level in Forces, but nope. This level takes place halfway through the game. And the reason why it was implied that this was the beginning of the game was because, for one, several trailers use this level as the main sorta CG backdrop, I guess you could say. And for 2, the level design looked too simple to be anything other than a tutorial level. And yeah, honestly, we would be here all day if I kept going on about the misleading nature of the Forces marketing. So let's just move on. Sonic Colors Ultimate is next, and man, I've been talking about this game a lot lately, haven't I? Yeah, you know, remaster bad, seizures, yada yada yeah. In all seriousness though, Sega was not upfront with us about this whole thing. It's another similar situation to 06 where the game just wasn't finished at launch, and on top of that, it looked worse than the original Wii game did in several instances. Because of this, Sega did whatever they could to hide the fact that this remaster of Colors doesn't look good. For example, in one of the HD Spotlight trailers for Colors Ultimate, Sega made sure to use the worst possible footage they could find of the original Colors to make it seem like Colors Ultimate looks better. Because I mean, yeah, it does look better than this DVD recorder ass footage. It actually reminds me of like a fake 4chan leak where they make sure the quality is low so they don't show any imperfections. Sega was just very weird about Colors Ultimate in general, because it was obviously just released as a cash grab to capitalize off of the Sonic movie success, but whatever. Speaking of cash grabs, Sonic Origins, everybody! It turns out the collection of 4 fully remastered classic Sonic games ended up being riddled with bugs and gameplay issues. And while all of that stuff with Origins is pretty bad, one selling point always baffled me when the original game was about to be released. At the end of most of the trailers, it said that there would be new playable characters. This was way before Origins Plus was even announced, so Amy definitely isn't what they meant by this. Some say that maybe Sega meant that Knuckles and Tails were now playable in Sonic 1, but come on now. Those aren't new playable characters, we've been playing as them for decades now. Knuckles wasn't even playable in Sonic CD at launch. This whole new playable characters thing was purely a lie. I get it though, because some people found Origins to be completely pointless when there were already countless other ways to play this game, especially for people who play games on PC. Origins will just always be a strange collection because it wasn't needed at all. Sure, it's nice being able to play classic Sonic on modern platforms, but there were already other ways to do it. So the misleading marketing is all they could really do to make the collection seem different. For the last part, we got Sonic Frontiers, and there's a lot of controversy surrounding this one, and this is one I'm personally very mad about. So when Sonic Frontiers was revealed, Sega advertised the Starfall Islands, which are the main open areas of the game. But as the release cycle for the game continued, people wondered exactly how many islands were going to be present in the game. Well, thankfully Sega told us that there were going to be 5 massive Starfall Islands, and this is still present on the website. Now, if you've played Frontiers, then you know that this is kind of misleading, because in reality, Sonic Frontiers only has 3, maybe 4 islands if we're being generous. The first 3 islands of the game are all different from one another. We have Kronos Island, which is a grassy island, Ares Island, which is a desert, and Chaos Island, which is a volcanic island. But after Chaos Island, we go to the 4th island, which is Rhea. And this island is just the other half of Kronos Island that was initially blocked off by invisible walls. And this island didn't even have anything going on in it besides 6 towers to climb. There were no memory tokens, no puzzles, no boss fights, and no character interactions. There was no incentive to explore this island whatsoever. So Rhea Island was over in like 30 minutes, but that's not all. The 4th island of the game, Aranos Island, well, granted it is an actual island this time, with puzzles and memory tokens and whatnot, it was also just more grass, and it hardly had any story moments. Not to mention how the final boss of the island was just a clone of the first boss. And as it turns out, Kronos, Rhea, and Aranos were originally supposed to act as one massive island, but I've talked about that countless times before, so go check out my Frontiers beta series if you're interested. So no, there are not 5 massive islands to explore in this game. That is just not true. And honestly, dude, when I first played Frontiers, I was so disappointed when I discovered this. Like many others, I was expecting expecting 5 full and unique islands to explore. Like, I thought maybe there was going to be a snow island or a ruined city or anything else really, but no, the majority of the game is grass. Yay! So yeah, false advertising in Sonic games happens all the time. Now, whether it is something you should care about, that's up to you, but personally, a lot of these instances are just more laughable than anything, which is mainly why I made this video. But yeah, let me know what you all think of this in the comments down below. Oh, and also, I opened a new Discord server, so click the link in the description to join that if you want to talk about Mario and Sonic and stuff. But that's all for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all later. Goodbye.